Slavery is back.
Welcome to a place where private business profit from a captive labour force, yet pennies are spent on medical services to a population in which the Indigenous, the poor and the mentally ill are overrepresented. Where isolation, humiliation and degradation are facts of life. Welcome to prison.
It depends who's telling the story, I suppose. The prisoners would have one view, the people who work in the prison system would have another, and I think it's up to people to decide where the truth is.
Give government propaganda and the media spin doctors the flick. And check out Doin' Time for news, views and tunes on prison issues from Guantanamo Bay to Christmas Island to prisons and detention centres everywhere. Every Monday at 4 p.m. on your community radio 3CR.
We are still fired up and we're still talking about revolution.
Hello and welcome to the Doin' Time show. This is 3CR Community Radio, 855 AM on the dial, streaming live on www.3cr.org.au. This is Marisa and I'll be taking you through until 5 o'clock this evening. First up on the show, we're going to be speaking with Scott Cosgriff from the Human Rights Law Centre. He is a senior lawyer there. And we will be speaking with Scott about some new research that has emerged that almost 80% of Australians support a pathway to permanent residency for migrants who have lived and worked in Australia and for several years, and this is according to new research that's just come out, as I said. And we'll be speaking about a survey and looking at refugees as well as migrant workers and some of the ways that they can be exploited. And we'll look at that research in detail in just a second. And then later on, we'll be speaking with Chris Breen from the Refugee Action Collective. We'll be speaking to him about an update in regards to what's happening with refugees and asylum seekers at the Park Hotel. And of course, we can't really have a discussion about that without including the pandemic. And we'll be speaking about lots of changes that have happened, in particular some of the draconian laws that the Morrison government has introduced, which has actually allowed the virus to rip. So we will talk about that later on in the show, but first up, we will be going shortly to Scott.
Yarra City Arts presents Music in Exile at Curtin Square this Sunday, February 13th. Come along from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. for a Yarra staycation in Carlton North featuring the soulful, funky, Afrobeat-infused music of Ajak Kawai and Camille El Fagali with Rayan, who will take you on a boundary-redefining classical and electronic journey through the Middle East and North Africa. For all Yarra staycation events, visit yarraCity.vic.gov.au/rediscover. Yarra City Arts is a 3CR supporter.
And you're back with 3CR Doin' Time show. And I'd like to now welcome Scott to the program from the Human Rights Law Centre. Hello, Scott.
Hi, Marisa. Thanks for having me.
It's lovely to have you. Now, Scott, I'm just going to quickly introduce the fact that the survey was conducted by Essential Media Communications and actually commissioned by the Human Rights Law Centre with support from the Migrant Workers Centre. Can you talk about this research and just give listeners a little bit of a background?
Yeah, well, we commissioned this research with the Migrant Workers Centre, which works with migrant workers in Victoria to understand their rights and enforce them in workplaces. And we joined up with them because we were both worried about what we say is quite a concerning trend, whereby many people who are living and building their lives in Australia aren't recognised as permanent residents, even when they've been in the country for 5 or 10 years. More and more people in that situation are forced to become permanently temporary under the federal government's existing policies. So we wanted to understand how that actually squares with what people in the community think about immigration and the visa system. We asked people, more than 1,000 members of the community what they think about immigration, what's good about it, how the system should work. And the results we think are notable because they're really contrary to government policy. We found that Australians overwhelmingly agree that people who've been living in Australia on visas for several years should have a pathway to permanent residency. More than 78% of people agreed. And 78% of people also agreed with the broader idea that migrants living in the country should have stability so that they can plan for the life that they want. And the reason that's so important, because as I say, immigration policy in this country over the last couple of decades has been going in exactly the opposite direction.
Absolutely. And essentially, is it fair to say that the federal government's immigration policy of unlimited numbers of temporary visas, which is combined with few pathways to the highly restricted permanent migration, does that increase the risk of wage theft and worker exploitation?
It certainly does. It's one of many real problems with having lots of long-term residents on these precarious visas. And it's really an issue of balance. Temporary visas aren't necessarily always bad, but Australia, the balance between the number of people on temporary visas and the opportunities for those people to become permanent after a number of years is really out of whack. We're talking about almost 2 million, more than 2 million people before COVID, a little bit less now on temporary visas in the community, but the government's actually lowered the number of places for those people to become permanent over time in the last few years. And it means that you've got more and more people who've lived here for 6, 8, 10 years, but are still in this really precarious position. So, as you say, labour exploitation is one major problem that results from this. We did the research with the Migrant Workers Centre, and they've been doing a lot of useful research with migrant workers about this issue. Last year, they found that 91% of the workers that they surveyed who'd experienced wage theft had arrived on a visa with no pathway to permanency. Almost 9 out of 10 people. And the underlying reason for this is that in different ways, temporary visas clothe people with these vulnerabilities that allow them to be exploited by their employers. Some people can only work for one particular employer. So if they speak up or if they want to leave, then their livelihood in Australia is at risk. Others fear losing their visa if they work too many hours. Recently, there have been some just unbelievable stories of farm workers in situations where they were getting paid an average of $9 a day, not $9 an hour, $9 a day. And unbelievable stories also about workers from Samoa and Vanuatu, quote unquote, absconding from their employers and paying a price from it. So all of these things affect different people from different walks of life, but there's a fundamental power dynamic that exists when you've got a reason not to speak up or a reason why you're tied to a particular employer, and that's bad for everyone. It's obviously bad for workers who get exploited. It's also bad for businesses that are trying to do the right thing but getting undercut. It's bad for other workers in those businesses. It's a stain on all of society. So worker exploitation is one obvious one. There's another real outcome of having people living in such uncertainty about their visa status when their home has become Australia. And that's just the destabilisation of people's lives. If your permission to be in the country that you call home has an end date, not knowing whether you're going to be able to apply for another visa or not, that uncertainty takes a huge psychological toll. And it's pretty clear that our friends, our neighbours, our colleagues on visas shouldn't have to jump from visa to visa for years on end, never knowing when it's going to end. They should be able to plan for their future like everyone else without having to make these really complicated, expensive applications all the time. And so that stability, I think, is something else that came out in the research. The community recognised that, the stability to be able to plan for your future is someone that everyone should have.
Absolutely. And indeed, there's been lots of disruption over the last 2 years because of the pandemic. And it's actually, this is an excellent opportunity, isn't it, to reset the approach to immigration. And political leaders really haven't taken steps, have they, to ensure that this system reflects the values of the Australian community? Well, there's definitely a huge disruption that's emerged in the last 2 years. Everyone's familiar with the border policies that were brought in relation to COVID, and one outcome of that has been to show the community what temporary visas are, what temporary visa holders look like in the community, and how dependent our society is on them. And the government's taken a really inconsistent approach to temporary visa holders over the journey. People might remember at the start of the pandemic, the Prime Minister held a press conference that basically said, if you're on a temporary visa, now's the time to go home. Barely 6 months later, politicians were there saying, oh dear, we don't have enough workers, and more recently, there's been a huge political push to bring people back in. Now, the question here is more about what the rights of those people look like once they're living here, and especially those people who've set up their lives here, who aren't just visiting, who've been living for 6, 8, 10 years in Australia, but are still treated like second-class citizens. Many of your listeners may have had this experience themselves, or they may have family members or friends or co-workers that have been through it themselves, because it's a serious chunk of the community who are increasingly living without the same rights as everyone else. And I'm wondering, Scott, let me just ask you something about refugees. Are refugees also reflected in this research? Because we have a lot of listeners that have been detained inside in refugee camps or, in MITA as well. Absolutely. And in hotel quarantine. Yep. Absolutely. So the temporary protection visas, this is really the policy that applies to refugees, and it leads to all those problems with labour exploitation and uncertainty in the same way it does to people who arrived as, skilled workers or international students. But it's particularly egregious when you look at the situation facing refugees in this position. And there are a lot of people suffering as a result of this. Most of them arrived in Australia in 2011, 12. So that's a decade of residence in Australia. And the temporary protection visa policy is set up so that they can never become permanent residents. Yeah. And I've already mentioned some of the problems that come up if you can never become a permanent visa holder. But another one that's particularly serious for refugees is family reunion. So if you're on a temporary visa, you don't have the right to sponsor your immediate family members. And for a lot of refugees who arrived in Australia back then, it's a decade of being separated from their partner, a decade of being separated from their young children. The government, is willing to do the absolute bare minimum and recognise that those people are refugees and let them stay in Australia, but while very cruelly denying them the right to be with their family. We've worked with one refugee in this situation who's living in regional Australia with her young daughter, and she has a husband. Her husband is in a refugee camp in an African country with their other children, and they simply have no pathway to get to Australia because she is stuck on a temporary visa, on a temporary protection visa. She can't sponsor the rest of her family, even though we're talking about her husband, her young kids.
and siblings who are growing up in different parts of the world because of the approach that the Australian government has taken to refugees. There are so many stories along those lines. A lot of them have to do with family separation. We all saw the images coming out of Afghanistan over the last 6 to 12 months, and it became very clear that refugees from that country are not going to be returning there for the foreseeable future. Some of them have been living in Australia for a decade on temporary visas. And in fact, with federal parliament back tomorrow, refugees from Afghanistan who are stuck on temporary protection visas are rallying in Canberra, along with their supporters, and calling on political leaders to end this problem, to allow them to apply for permanent visas that reflect the fact that they are members of this community, and allow them to reunite with their family members. And another incredible example, which I saw in the news just today, is the story of Ali Agshar Husseini. This man is the best wrestler in Australia, has won countless competitions, but because he's on a temporary protection visa, will never be able to represent the country he lives in. So as the time goes by, the cruelty and the pointlessness of these policies just becomes more and more acute, and it becomes more and more incumbent on political leaders to recognise the injustice of not letting people for whom Australia is home have the same rights as everyone else.
What a dreadful thing that is to be in a sport and not be able to represent. And what's the point? I think, a lot of asylum policy that this government is continuing to oversee, and your program has been so good at highlighting these issues over the years. Thank you.
A lot of asylum policy was forged around the very extreme politics around people seeking asylum by boats back in 2011 and 2012. We're a decade on now, and the policy, many of the policies are still there. People are still stuck on Nauru and stuck in PNG. People who arrived in 2013 are still in detention today, and really for no reason than this stubborn insistence on the policy announcements at the time. And I think the government's insistence on the temporary protection visa policy is just one example of that. What's positive, I suppose, from our research is that people can see through it. I think this gives us more confidence that people in the community recognise that they don't really want to live in a community where people have such different levels of rights, even though they're setting up lives over here over many, many years. Absolutely. And in fact, no one should be illegal, and we need to let them stay in Australia. So lastly, I believe that there's been a report that's on the Migrant Worker Centre's website, and I believe it's entitled Lives in Limbo, the Experiences of Migrant Workers Navigating Australia's Unsettling Migration System. I believe that's available, is it? That's right. So Migrant Workers Centre, our partner on this research, excellent organisation that works with migrant workers to understand their rights, enforce them in the places they work. And that report, Lives in Limbo, was mainly a survey-based report that looks at the experience of migrant workers in all sorts of industries and workplaces, and particularly that exploitation issue that I was talking about, making the very clear structural links between how people are treated and the visa situation that they find themselves in, and made some really positive recommendations for change. And one of those is simply to address, to look squarely at this imbalance between temporary visas and permanent visas in Australian immigration policy. Absolutely. Scott, thank you so much for coming onto the program. It's been lovely to have you. And as listeners may recall, we have interviewed Scott
a few times, really, in regards to various campaigns that have emerged out of the Human Rights Law Centre.
Always great to talk to you.
You too. Thanks so much. Take care.
You're listening to 3CR Community Radio 855 AM on digital and online. 3CR Radical Radio.
Housing Justice After Lockdown examines renters' rights in Australia throughout the post-COVID and provides a critical discussion on the roadmap to a more secure and fairer housing reality for everyone. The forum will offer an open discussion on organising beyond the pandemic for community solidarity and housing justice. It's a free online event on Wednesday, February 9th from 5:30pm to 7:30pm, brought to us by the Renters and Housing Union, the Support Network for International Students and Homes Not Prisons, and also 3CR. To register, check the website for details, 3cr.org.au. Housing Justice, a free online event, Wednesday, February 9th, 5:30 to 7:30pm. See you there.
And you're back with the Doing Time show, 3CR Community Radio, 855 AM on the dial, streaming live on www.3cr.org.au, and this is Marisa. And you just heard an extended interview with Scott Cosgriff from the Human Rights Law Centre. He's a senior lawyer. And we were speaking about refugees and also looking at research conducted by the Migrant Centre and various other organisations. So we're going to be continuing our discussion now about refugees and asylum seekers, but looking more at detention and specifically the Park Hotel. And indeed, we're going to be speaking now with Chris Breen from the Refugee Action Collective and speaking with him also about some of the changes that has happened in regards to laws regarding the pandemic and how has that impacted on asylum seekers and refugees and what's going on at the Park Hotel specifically, and covering hopefully working up to covering some of the election as well. Hello, Chris. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Marisa. Thanks for having me on.
It's lovely to have you. And it's been a very, very concerning and worrying summer, hasn't it?
It has. I mean, the Djokovic visa fiasco has inadvertently drawn attention to the plight of the Medevac refugees who've been locked up for almost 9 years now, which is just, cruel beyond words. But as I said, it's drawn attention to that plight, and I think the coalition, Scott Morrison, are increasingly isolated. I think it was last week, there were 30 religious leaders who circulated a video calling for the release of the refugees in the Park Hotel and calling out Morrison's hypocrisy. That was Christians, Jews, Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus. And the Labor Party has shifted its position and is formally calling for the release of the Medevac refugees, not for permanent resettlement, but they're calling for their release. And so that's welcome as well.
Absolutely. And just to alert listeners, and we've talked about this many times, haven't we, Chris, but the refugees that are detained in the Park Hotel were the Medevac refugees that were meant to be getting medical treatment, which was that bill was then revoked, wasn't it?
Yes, I mean that's right. Actually, since the Djokovic visa fiasco has just put pressure on the government, the Prime Minister Scott Morrison has resorted to outright lies about the refugee status of those people, suggesting that they're not refugees, when indeed 25 out of the 32 are. And the others, faced a flawed process. They came here for medical treatment well over 2 years ago. Many of them haven't got that treatment. Scott Morrison liked to say rules are rules, but when they came here, they were first told they would be released. And then when Morrison himself personally vowed to overturn the Medevac legislation, started locking them all up as a matter of course to suggest they were some sort of threat. And the rules changed. So they have found themselves locked up 6 years offshore, getting towards 3 years onshore. They are refugees. They've committed no crime. There's about 60 people around Australia. Well over half of the Medivac refugees, because of legal cases that were going to embarrass the government, have been released. There's no good reason to hold the rest of them in detention.
Absolutely. And in fact, with the coronavirus, it's interesting how the Morrison government has changed a lot of the rules in regards to isolation periods being shortened. Do you think that will affect the spread of the virus in detention?
No, I don't think that rule will particularly affect the spread of the virus in detention. I mean, it may be that people being forced to work, even though they're close contacts, can cause issues. I mean, there's already been an outbreak at the Park Hotel. 23 of the 46 who were there at the time contracted COVID. 2 of them were hospitalised. There's still an outbreak in the Villawood detention centre. I don't have current figures, but last I heard there were up to 60 isolating. So it's already there. Like the government, it's been an absolute failure to implement any kind of measures. Like, there's all sorts of vulnerable people in detention, to take them out once the outbreak started. I'm a school teacher, and we've got air purifiers in every classroom. We get given free rat tests. There's been nothing like that in detention. The refugees were the last people to be offered vaccines. It's a callous disregard for their lives.
And that includes the Park Hotel, doesn't it?
Yeah, that includes the Park Hotel. It does. There's people like...
Yeah, go on.
I was just going to say, there's people like Mandy and Adnan, who came when they were 15 and 16 and have spent a third of their lives in detention. They spent most of that time on Nauru. They should have come off with the children and families, but they turned 18 at that time. It's just, who would do that to a child? Who'd do that to anyone? It's horrific.
It is a violation of human rights. Now, just following on from my point before we get on to the next topic, Chris, what I meant to say in terms of the virus is that I just meant to say that there are really serious staff shortages, among the cleaning, kitchen and medical staff in these centres, with a reduction in services. And I was just thinking that, given that the refugees were not being tested regularly and they don't have those services, it could spread, given that, on top of it with those shorter isolation periods.
Yes, that could all contribute, although it's been the guards bringing the virus in on the whole.
Exactly.
And, I mean, some of the refugees they obviously need things cleaned and they need food because they're unable to do that to themselves. They're locked in their rooms. But some of them probably welcome not having the checks in the middle of the night to do head counts and things like that. The bigger failure, I'm not sure of the impact that the staff shortages have had on detention. I mean, the biggest factor is people being locked up. Yeah.
Absolutely. So can you comment now then on the link to what happened with the tennis player and how that actually drew attention to the plight of the refugees, particularly in the Park Hotel? Because, cynically, and I have to say cynically, I have noticed that there is double coverage on the ABC and other media outlets since this happened.
Cynically, that's right. Scott Morrison hoped to make it a tough on borders issue. It's failed to give him a bounce in the polls, but that's what he was hoping to do. And he stuck Djokovic in the Park Hotel with the refugees. And Djokovic being there did draw attention to their plight. And so, various media outlets were forced to cover it. Also, there's media coverage in a whole range of places you don't normally see coverage about refugees, sports journalism and other things. And also, just what Liberty Victoria and a previous immigration minister have called the godlike powers in the Migration Act, that the government has had a light shone on them and the same powers and sort of, arbitrary and political nature of migration that was applied to Djokovic. First he was given a visa, then it was cancelled, under different rules, have been applied to refugees much, much more cruelly. So, Djokovic has been able to, he's been deported, but he can go home. Refugees aren't able to do that. And the same visa powers which were used in Djokovic's case could be used to free the refugees. The only reason that these refugees are locked up is because the government refuses to issue them visas when they come to Australia for medical treatment.
That's exactly right. Yeah, what's happening with campaigns in regards to the Park Hotel is the Refugee Action Collective still going down to protest there?
Yes, our next big protest is going to be on Saturday, March the 5th at 2 o'clock outside the Park Hotel. People should keep that date in their diaries. Also, there's going to be the annual Walk for Justice for Refugees event on April 10, which will go from the State Library up to the Park Hotel. In the meantime, if people want, there's a daily presence. It's not RAC, it's just all sorts of refugee activists. 6 o'clock on weekdays and 3 p.m. on weekends outside the Park Hotel, which is 701 Swanson Street in Carlton. And anybody can get down and show their support.
Wonderful. And what's the view of the Refugee Action Collective in regards to the election itself?
We are producing some election call flutes, not party political, but to raise the profile of refugees as an issue. And if people want to have them on their fence, their house, they can contact us, Refugee Action Collective at gmail.com. And they will say, what does it say again? Enough of Morrissey's cruelty and lies, kick the coalition out, and small writing at the top, and then big, free the refugees, permanent visas, end offshore detention. So, we're hoping the coalition gets kicked out at this election. Having said that, if a Labor government comes in, it is worth looking at what will change and what won't change. The Labor said they'll free the Medivac refugees, but they won't give them permanent visas here. They might send them to New Zealand, it's not clear. Labor will also provide permanent visas for the thousands of temporary visa holders in Australia. But that won't deal with all of the people on bridging visas or who've had the flawed fast-track system applied to them and been rejected. And there are other outstanding issues. Labor still supports offshore detention, which we think has to end. They haven't said anything about overturning Tony Abbott's ban on taking any refugees from Indonesia. And there's, tens of thousands and half of them Afghans in limbo there where they have been for a decade. They can't open bank accounts, they can't get healthcare. So that's something else that we would like to see changed in elections. So while there are potential changes from a change in government, which whoever wins the election, RAC is going to keep campaigning to dismantle all of the architecture of refugee deterrence.
Yeah, I think while we're talking about the Labor Party, can I just keep you on for a couple more minutes, Chris?
Yeah, sure.
Great. Because I wanted to ask you about the boat policy in Labor and what the position of Labor is in regards to that, because it just seems a little bit confusing there.
Yeah, I didn't mention that. Labor is still in support of boat turnbacks, which is another shameful policy. As
they're concerned about. Sorry, Chris. They're concerned. They don't want. They want to turn back the boats as well. Labor.
Yeah, they want to turn back the boats as well. Okay. It's perfectly legal. It's a human right to be able to seek asylum by any means, whether that's by plane, whether that's by boat. But Labor is saying it will turn boats around. I think it would be an issue for a Labor government in a way it's not for the coalition, in that there was, it's probably going back 2 conferences now, there was a vote on the party, on Labor conference, and 40% of the delegates voted against vote turnbacks. So it remains a divisive issue within Labor, and one that we would hope to shift.
Yeah, I mean, so the Labor Party is then divided about this cruel turn back the votes.
Yes, the leadership of the Labor Party remains in favour of it, but many, good Labor people on the ground oppose it. Labor for Refugees certainly opposes it.
And what about United Australia? Because I know they're really trying to scratch a foothold, into the political arena.
I haven't sat down and looked at United Australia policies. So, Clive Palmer is a joke. If anything, they're usually to the right of the coalition, and their role is really to try and prop up the coalition. There's, little good going to come from. I mean, it's absurd actually. They've got these big freedom things everywhere, but they're not talking about freedom for refugees.
No, they're not talking about freedom for anybody, really.
Yeah.
But, and what about, I've heard a really interesting discussion on Insiders on Sunday on the ABC, and I believe they were interviewing someone from the National Party. I'm sorry, I can't remember her name. Barnaby Joyce had apparently cancelled his interview. But they made a comment, she made a comment about, in regards to the fact that people at the Park Hotel, refugees and asylum seekers, were being kept there to be resettled in America. I mean, I find that really surprising, don't you?
It's true. There are some people, I'm pretty sure it includes Adnan, who have been approved to go to the United States, but it's been a long, cumbersome process going through all the ticks and approvals things, and there is absolutely zero reason why they can't be released while they're waiting to go to America. Like, there is no good reason to hold them. I mean, Peter Dutton himself said it's the reason that some of the Medivac refugees were released was because it's too expensive, and we say it remains too expensive in human terms, in financial terms, to keep any of them in detention. Yes, you're right, it's absurd.
It is absurd, particularly because we need to be resettling the refugee asylum seekers. And the Greens seem to be missing in action. What's happened there?
The Greens have been... the Greens have still been speaking at most of the rallies that we have.
For sure. Yep.
There's, the Greens' policies are, better than the ALP, in that they opposed offshore processing and boat turnbacks, which is welcome. I think they were doing something tomorrow, calling on the Labor Premier Daniel Andrews to speak out. Because while, it's a good thing that Labor and Christine Keneally have called for the release, but they're not exactly on the front foot about it. And given it's in Victoria, if the Labor Premier Daniel Andrews was to speak, it would just add to the pressure. The Greens are. I'm not sure if it's going to be the main thing they run on in the election, but they are still campaigning for refugee rights.
And the Socialists, will they be on the ballot paper?
On which ballot paper?
What I mean is, will they be in the election?
There are various socialist groups contesting the election, but I couldn't speak for all of them. No,
I was a bit cheeky there. I just think that there's so many different factions, groups, isn't there?
Yeah.
But look, we won't discuss that any further, I think, but because we are talking about refugees and asylum seekers, but I did want to mention the election in terms of refugee policy, and that is terribly important and relevant, don't you think?
It is. I mean, the sad thing is that it's not going to be something that the election is fought over in that positive sense.
No.
We're going to have to force the election. It's not going to be something that people vote on. It's part of the reason the coalition get away with it. But it is something that I think that has, over a long period of time, just added to a sense of distaste, unease with Morrison and the lies that his government tells.
Absolutely. So, all right, we need to really watch this space in regards to the ongoing campaign to free the refugees and asylum seekers from the Park Hotel and other detention centres. Anything else you'd like to say, Chris, before we finish?
I guess that's all. Please come along to the rally on March the 5th, which is calling to free the refugees and for permanent visas. Also, there are Refugee Action Collective meetings every Monday tonight at 6:30 that anyone can come to. We meet in the Kathleen Syme Library, and it's also the hybrid meetings via Zoom as well for people who find it hard to get in. And that Zoom link is on our Facebook page and I think our website as well. So if people want to come along, please do. The more people we've got involved, the more that we can do.
Absolutely. And finally, the police, how are they towards people protesting now?
We've had, during the COVID, when the COVID restrictions were used against right to protest, we had a lot of problems. We haven't had any problems with the police since those restrictions, since they've been forced to be lifted. Yeah.
All right, Chris. Well, thank you so much for coming onto the program. It's been lovely to have you, and keep up the good work.
Okay, thank you. I should just about the police. We're still facing an outstanding $50,000 in fines from, I should say. Those court cases will be coming up where, challenging the fines in courts for people protesting the car convoy where I was found not guilty for incitement. So that'll be something for people to watch out for as well. And we again call on the police. Back in April 2020, we drove around the Mantra Hotel. We were going to drive around the Mantra Hotel. We were stopped by the police. 30 people were given $1,652 fines each, making a total of around $50,000. There's been a long, slow court process. I was charged with incitement, found not guilty, but the fines are still there, so we're still facing those massive fines for what was an entirely COVID-safe protest. And so we would call on the police, the Victorian government, to drop those fines. They shouldn't go ahead.
But that was in 2020, and it was $50,000 a fine.
In total for the 30 people, yeah.
Please, that's all I can say.
Yep.
I mean, and you didn't even get to go to the protest, Chris.
No, I didn't know. They turned up at my house, and I spent 9 hours in Preston Police Station. But
and that is indeed a reminder to listeners that we still need to remain vigilant, don't we, in regards to what's happening with the right to protest, particularly in a pandemic. And, of course, all your protests are COVID-safe, aren't they?
Absolutely. There's never been a case of COVID spread from a refugee protest in Australia. We take all COVID precautions, as we did during the one that we, received the fines for. We take COVID very seriously. We're only too well aware of the vulnerability of refugees with COVID.
Good on you, Chris. Thanks so much for your company, and we'll talk some other time. Thanks so much.
Okay. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Hi, we're from Fitzroy Primary School, and you're listening to Community Radio on 3CR.
Would you like to get involved in the decision-making process at 3CR? Nominations are now open in 3CR's Community Radio Federation elections.
You can stand as a subscriber representative and have valuable input into the programming and future direction of this diverse and dynamic radio station.
Nominations are due by Wednesday, the 16th of February at 5 p.m.
For more information, contact 3CR Station Manager on 9419-8377
or download the nomination form from the 3CR website, 3cr.org.au/people.
this deal really accentuates and is very complementary to the white Australia domestic policy. Here you have not only a white alliance, but an Anglo-Saxon alliance of the ultimate cultural allies of the United States banding together, and the significance that it is aimed at colored peoples, at Asian peoples, at Pacific peoples. This is injecting a horrible racial dimension to this conflict. So I think the US and Australian elites' racist military policies are complementing the increasingly racist domestic policies. So I think, therefore, we really have to look out very, very carefully at this very dangerous synergy between racism on the military front and racism on the domestic front.
Subscribe to 3CR. Where else can you hear radical news, analysis, music and opinions? Go to 3cr.org.au/subscribe or call the station on 03 9419 8377.
Join the National Sustainable Living Festival this February for a program showcasing cutting-edge solutions to the ecological and social challenges of our times. Be part of the Decade Zero and join the sustainability movement with a month of workshops, talks, demonstrations, artworks, exhibitions, films and live performances. Let's bounce back with sustainability in 2022. Head to slf.org.au for the full details. The National Sustainable Living Festival is a 3CR supporter.
Melbourne Pride will be taking over Smith Street and Gertrude Street Precinct on Sunday the 13th of February between 11am and 9pm. This free event is a state government initiative delivered by festival partner Midsummer to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the decriminalisation of homosexuality in Victoria. The Fitzroy Precinct will be transformed into a huge street party with 2 music stages, activities, community stores and more. For more information, visit midsummer.org.au. Midsummer is a 3CR supporter.
And you're back with the Doing Time show, and we're nearing the end of our show. It's approximately 4:47, and I wanted to personally thank Scott Cosgriff and also Chris Breen. Scott from the Human Rights Law Centre, senior lawyer, and also Chris Breen from the Refugee Action Collective. And this show, I believe, was specifically dedicated to refugees and asylum seekers today. And so, yeah, we've had 2 extended interviews that have discussed quite specifically what's been happening, particularly in the context of the election and the pandemic, and in regards to research that's emerged in terms of permanent visas and the fact that Australians do want workers and refugees here. Now, just before I end the show, I wanted to just alert listeners to the fact that we do have Subscriber Drive coming up, and Subscriber Drive is very important. It runs from Monday 14th of February to Sunday the 20th of February, and we really do need people to subscribe, and it is important to subscribe to all shows. And on the 14th of February is where I'll be broadcasting the Doing Time show for Subscriber Drive, and I'm hoping that we have at least 2 listeners that subscribe on the day or even before the day, because with our show in particular, we look at prisons and we look at communities that are deprived of a voice, and there's a lot of media that really you can't watch or listen to on other arenas. So it is really important that people do subscribe. And let me just tell you just very quickly how to do that. So You can subscribe online, www.3cr.org.au, subscribe, or you can call 9419 8377 and press 1 to subscribe. So I just wanted to let you know that is coming up. And pretty soon we're going to be going out with our theme song, Black Fella, White Fella, by the Rumpy Band. And, so it's Goodbye from Marisa, and there's going to be Beyond Zero coming up next. Not Beyond Zero. What am I I was talking about the old title there. It's Climate Action is coming up very soon. And please stay tuned every Monday from 4 to 5 for the Doing Time show. And I'm hopefully going to be bringing you 3 interviews for next Monday. But I did want to actually bring you some extended interviews today in regards to refugees and asylum seekers, because we did have a big break over the summer and quite a lot has changed. And, last week we brought you coverage from a report back on it from Invasion Day. And today we wanted to specifically kick off the year with 2022 with what was happening with refugees and asylum seekers. So it's Goodbye from Marisa, and see you next Monday from 4 to 5. Tune in every Monday, 4 to 5, for the Doing Time show. Bye.
You're listening to 3CR Community Radio 855 AM. Visit the 3CR website at 3cr.org.au/podcast to hear the most recent recording from each show, or 3cr.org.au/streaming to listen live.
It's all about a voice in our own country. We've got a reason to be screaming out, where's our voice in this country? Not that I want to be a part of the Constitution for that, That's why 3CR is so important to me and this community here. We've got a voice, but it's not, we're entitled to a bigger voice than what we've got, but it's all about having a voice.
Subscribe to 3CR, fiercely independent and community controlled. Go to 3cr.org.au/subscribe or call the station on 03 9419 8377.
What we're dealing with here is a total lack of respect for the law.
Tune in to Done by Law.
An informal and irreverent look at the law. Critical insights and analysis from diverse community perspectives.
Done by Law, 6 p.m. Tuesdays.
Have you heard of long COVID? If you or someone you know have had COVID-19, you may still experience symptoms weeks or months later. There are many symptoms of long COVID, but the most frequent are extreme tiredness, shortness of breath, and muscle aches and joint pains. Anyone can experience long COVID, including children. You can find information in your language on the Health Translations website, healthtranslations.vic.gov.au. Just type long COVID as a keyword.
A 3CR supporter.
"20 Years on the Inside" is an iconic new podcast series that gives voice to the experience of First Nations people in the Victorian prison system.
20 Years on the Inside. I'm Vicky Roach.
And I'm Kutcher Edwards. This series reflects on 20 years of listening to our mobs on the inside as part of the Beyond the Bars prison broadcasts.
20 Years on the Inside is essential listening for anyone looking to educate themselves about the realities of life on the inside and the need to end Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander incarceration.
Well, a lot of the boys mentioned about being in jail. What you do really isn't who you are.
You know, it's how you love your family, it's how you care about your cousins, and it's how you care about your people. That's what this is about for me.
Catch the podcast via the 3CR website or on your favourite podcast app.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast produced in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.